Welcome to this episode of The Gathering. I'm your host, Abiola, and today I'm going to be joined by Debra Chosen. I'm really excited about this episode because we are talking about knowing who you are, especially when you're in the process. We're all in the process of life. Things are uncertain. Sometimes we get major surprises, good ones and bad ones. How do you maintain your strength, your identity, your value, and your worth during those times? Thanks, Debra, for joining us. I'm really excited to have you here. People have said so much good stuff about you, so I think we're going to have a really, really good conversation. So just to start off today, we're talking about, trusting the process, purpose, self-care, living your best life, self-improvement, that whole kind of area. But before we get there, it would be good to know a bit more about your journey, how you came to Christ or how you found God on your own terms.
Okay, so biggie to start with, but a good question nonetheless. So I'm one of those people who probably, like quite a few different people, was technically speaking raised Christian, so I was born into a Christian family, and as long as I'd always known, we'd gone to church. So since young, my background is such that in the church I was like really active, so because I sing on the side and stuff, so I'd always be on the side. I don't want to make it too loud because then people want to hear it, but no. But because I do sing, I'd always found my place like in the choir, so it was quite common for me to basically be a part of ministry. So you know how it is when you grow up in the church, you're used to just doing things like going with the motions, like doing things religiously and putting on one face but maybe being a different person outside. And I would say that probably age like 16, it was definitely my college years. I think it was my first year of college is where I kind of came to a place where it was just so evident that I was living life one way outside of church, and I was, doing all the right things in church. And I think what maybe frustrated me, or what kind of convicted me about that season, is that I knew better. Like I knew better because I guess I'd had access to the Word and I'd had access to, the Spirit of God, but I hadn't fully surrendered. So I was definitely out here just acting a fool, and just not living a life that kind of fully glorified God. So it wasn't until I went to this gathering, you can say, of Christians called Festival of Life. And Festival of Life is basically like a big, kind of like a really, really long night vigil.
Like a rally.
Rally is probably the best kind of word to use, exactly. It's like a real rally, and that comes from the Redeemed Church, so Redeemed Christian Church of God, which I used to attend back then when I was young. So I went to this particular episode, I guess you could say, or particular event of Festival of Life, and I'd been going before anyways, but there was something a little bit different about this one. There was a guy that was preaching, I really wish I could remember his name because sometimes I think I want to thank you for what you did, but there was a guy that was preaching basically, and I remember he was preaching on the importance of value and like on our worth, and I don't know whether it was particularly aimed towards women, but me as a woman, I felt like it really resonated with me what he was saying. I'll never forget that he ministered about a diamond, and about like a diamond in the rough, and how like our value is more than rubies. And I know that part of it was taken from Proverbs 3, I want to say, where it says that her value is like she's worth more than rubies. And something just clicked when he said it. And I think because at the time, a lot of the things I was doing reflected that I didn't have a real understanding of my value. So I was placing myself in a lot of places, a lot of positions, like a lot of environments that I didn't need to be in, that didn't glorify God, and that in hindsight I was there because I didn't really know how precious I was. So I was looking for affirmation in like relationships, I was looking for confidence in compliments and all these different kind of things. And even though on the outside I'm this confident person, and I was at the time, on the inside I knew something was missing, like I was empty. So he continued to minister, and something kind of just clicked, and I said, like, I'm tired of this, of like half knowing God. I need to have the full experience. So I went forward at that point, and I remember my best friend was with me at the time, Lola, and I remember closing my eyes and just thinking, just like shut her out, because I didn't want to be like thrown off by whether anyone was looking or anything like that. So I closed my eyes, etc., and then I just went forward. And so that was basically like the defining moment in terms of where I gave my life to Christ. But definitely wasn't easy like straight away. It was a real process, of course. But that's really where I first just said like, Lord, I surrender. I leave
That was
everything.
the defining point.
Yeah.
That's great that you actually touched on value, because this is what I really wanted to talk to you about. And it's amazing because this is the first time we're meeting in person, but we've been in touch online and everything. And I'm so fascinated by the self-improvement, self-care, self-love movement and journey, and I think it's a wonderful thing. I'm curious to know, but you can only care about yourself if you have a sense of value. You can only truly care about yourself if you know what you're even taking care of and how much it's worth. So could you talk to me a bit more about what is value really? Is it the same for everybody? Is it specific to women? How do you measure your value then outside of compliments, like you said, or attention, etc.?
I think that's a really good question. I think for myself, when I truly understood my value, it was because I had that revelation from the Word. I think that the best place to go to know who you really are is the Word.
Yeah.
The Word kind of shows you a version of yourself that maybe you know you could be, but sometimes, you know, self-consciousness or insecurities will tell you, no, like I'm not that great, I'm not that person. But when you read things like, you know, like before he formed the earth, like he knew us, like he's known me, like he's chosen me, it kind of places a sense of value upon you that I have found has really empowered me when maybe the compliments aren't coming, or on the surface, you know, things are not happening to me that are adding value, so to speak. The Word of God is unshakable, and no matter what is happening to us or what has happened to us, His truth is what stands ultimately. And so I find that understanding how God sees me has really enabled me to see myself better. And one of the things I've kind of been praying recently is, Lord, like, help me to see myself how you see me. Like, I really think it's so key to be able to be aligned with God in that way, because if we rely on like how we see ourselves, of course I'm going to just see my insecurities, I'm going to see my deficiencies and the things that I lack. But if God tells me that everything that I need, I have it in Him, and all the help I need, I have it in the Holy Spirit, then why can I not be great with Him, you know? So I think value is not an easy one, especially as women. But ultimately it can only be found in Christ. Ultimately.
That is really profound, actually, and there's so much in that I just want to quickly unpack. Quick question though, so Debra's alias is Debra Chosen.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Is that where this comes from? This revelation?
Kind of, sorta, kind of. So there was a time when, like, I used to do poetry, actually, way back. I used to do spoken word, and I just didn't want to be going by my government name. So I was like, okay, sense. I need something. So I started thinking, etc. And a friend of mine was like, oh, why don't you just like flick through the Bible and see if like any words come to you, blah, blah, blah. Actually, the first word that came to me was destiny, but I was like...
Debra Destiny.
Yeah,
I'm not
like,
sure.
Nah, I was like, the alliteration is a bit much.
Sure, yeah.
So I was like, no. But then eventually I did come across the scripture. It sounds so cliche, but I came across the scripture that says that many are called, but few are chosen. Wow. And it just kind of sat with me, and it reminded me that the way that I kind of applied it is that in everything that I was doing and I'm doing, so whether that was poetry or whether that's what I do now with Trust in the Process, I've been chosen for this. Like, God has called me, and that's not in a like elitist kind of way or anything. That's actually quite humbling. It's like, even me with my like frailties and me with everything that I lack, God sees fit to use me as His like mouthpiece. So yeah, Debra Chosen that's kind of where it came from.
That's great. So you actually touched on worth is more than rubies. You know, before He created the world, He knew us. Practically, and you said that the revelation of your worth came from the Word. So in those days, if you have them where you know things get shaken, maybe confidence gets shaken, are there any specific things that you do to remind yourself of who you really are? Are there any verses that stand out, or just any other things? They don't have to be verses that kind of help you, strengthen you.
Yeah. So one of the things I'll say is, for myself, I tend to find when my confidence is most shaken is when I'm doing comparisons. Like when I'm subconsciously or consciously comparing myself, whether it's with someone on Instagram or it's with an old version of myself, or just comparison can be so dangerous. And everyone obviously knows the phrase, comparison is the thief of joy. And it's very, very real.
But how many of us live with that knowledge in mind. Okay.
Yeah. So oftentimes if I find like I'm kind of struggling with confidence, usually it's got to do with that. So typically I will kind of look at what am I taking in, so what am I consuming, what am I focusing on, because I believe that what you focus on, obviously you make larger, like you magnify it. So okay, maybe subconsciously I've been focusing on like all these other people on Instagram and like other people's lives, and my personal kind of solution to that is to take a step back. So that might look like a digital detox for me, for example. So I will just have a break from social media, or I'll obviously supplement that with prayer. You know, I'll pray my way through it, and I'll say, Lord, like help me to focus on who I am and who you've called me to be, and see myself how you see me. Because like I said, I think oftentimes when people's confidence is affected, it's just because we're focusing on the wrong thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's one of the things. And then definitely prayer, definitely the word as well, like you said, and just allowing God to minister to me and to just love on me. I find that when I feel his love and when I feel loved by him and I remember that I'm loved by him, then that gives me a kind of confidence that nothing else can kind of give me anyways. So yeah, it's just about making sure, okay, am I really connected to the source?
I love that you talked about the digital detox, because it's a type of self-care, and self-care is so important for the modern millennial and the way that we're tending towards in society, especially with mental health. I found really, really fascinating and also very kind of poignant what you said about it's not just about the digital detox. You supplement that with prayer and with the word, because when you take something out, it's great to take something out and, you know, kick bad habits, but it's equally important to be able to fill that back up with something that's edifying and positive. Otherwise you just have an empty space. And there's actually something in the word that talks about you know, when a spirit leaves a home and the home is cleared up, it will actually return and make a home for itself again. And while that sounds a bit scary because it talks about spirits and negative vibes, it's actually just that you can't exclude things and then have nothing, because then you just leave yourself open to whatever may come back. You have to fill it up with something of value. So how did you navigate that? Was that easy? Because people tell me all the time they struggle with reading the Bible. So yes, supplement the digital detox with the word and prayer. How?
Definitely not as easy as it sounds. Definitely. I think with myself, when I'm doing like a digital detox, the easiest part, so to speak, is the pulling away from social media. I don't really find that terribly hard now because I've done them so often.
How often do you do it? Is there a set time?
So there's not a set time, but I do it when I feel like that tug of you're not focusing, like you're distracted, whether it's distracted by comparison or distracted by good things even, but you're just distracted. You're not spending the sufficient time with God that you should be spending, yet you're investing so much time into your mobile phone. Like, your mobile phone's not going to save you. What are you doing? So that happens from time to time. But when I do take part in like a digital detox, like I said, the kind of easiest part is pulling away. Then it's, okay, so I've got all this free time now. There's my Bible. Guess I should pick it up. And like there's this thing over here that's kind of distracting me as well, and then there's this other thing, and there's this demand, and there's, you know, etc.
There's a to-do list, there's emails. For me, sometimes there's food.
Where
am I going
to get one? This is it. Like there's always something, essentially. But actually, I really like something that I believe Iffy Alexis, so she's someone that I follow online, and I believe she said it once, and she said that if we always wait till we feel like spending time with God, then we're never going to spend time with God, or we're very rarely going to. Like, it's not fellowship and like devotion is not a thing that can be reliant on our feelings, because oftentimes I'll be completely transparent, you know, I don't feel like opening the word. Sometimes I don't, and sometimes I don't feel like God checking me. I don't feel like the Holy Spirit checking me and telling me about myself. So sometimes it is a struggle. I'm not gonna lie about that at all. Sometimes it's a bit of like, I might start off by playing some worship music. I'm like, come on, Deborah, get in the zone. I'm like, okay, fine, I'll grab my Bible. But then what I find is when I allow myself to be immersed in it, and when I actually make that connection, suddenly it's like, almost what was I doing
before?
What was I so afraid of?
I was saying to friends actually the other day that some days I'll feel so just tired, or if I've been out, you know, day back to back to back, and I've done loads of work and I've been working, I come home and I'm like, oh, I'm so tired. I almost feel like, oh, I'm sad, but actually you're not sad, you're tired. Then I just open my Bible, read, I don't know, recently I was reading 1st and 2nd Timothy, and I was like, this is what I've been missing.
Yeah.
I'm not I'm a bit tired, but I'm not tired, I'm not depressed.
Yeah.
I just need to like read the word.
Yes,
and I think what you said about your feelings is so key, because when you said that, the first thing I thought was, but shouldn't you want to worship God? Shouldn't you want to? But we have to understand in life that actually there's almost like two factors at play, and it's almost like, I guess, going to the gym or starting a new habit, that all because you don't want to do something doesn't mean it's bad, and all because you want to do something doesn't mean it's good.
Yeah.
Actually, it's probably the path of least resistance is probably the worst option, where you're feeling that resistance is actually what you should push into.
Yes.
And a lot of the time in society, I feel as if people are now moving towards the do what I want, but what you want really may not get you to where you need to be. It's just the truth. And I think we need to get braver and more honest with ourselves to embrace the fact that I know that I don't want to do this right now, but it's worth it. And when I get into it, it's all that I couldn't really be bothered. It all kind of goes away.
Definitely. And I think one thing that was quite key for me, and so I used to kind of struggle with the whole thing of, why do I not feel like you know, like communion with God all the time? Why do I not always feel it? And there's a scripture, and I wish I could remember exactly, but essentially it says that it's God that gives us the power and the will to do what pleases Him. And when I read that, I remember, like, I'd read it all the time, but then there was one particular time and it just made a different level of sense to me, because I was like, okay, so what you're saying is you give me that desire, you can give that desire, because I spent a lot of my like younger Christian years feeling like everything should just naturally come from me, you know, like not thinking that flesh was going to get in the way, and you know, us just being humans ultimately, and the frailties that come with that. But when I found that, it was just so refreshing, because I discovered, okay, I can actually say to God, like, Lord, help me love you more, help me have a desire to want to spend more time with you, help me like set my heart on fire for the things that, you know, you're passionate about. And then I think it's kind of becomes more co-laboring with God. It's like we're working together on this journey, and I think that's been really freeing for me.
Yeah, I think that's great, because it is God that gives you the power. So when you feel like you can't be bothered, you shouldn't feel guilty and try and hide away from that. You should actually say, God, this is how I'm feeling. Can you refresh that power in me? And I think sometimes when people feel like they should be, and all these words of I should, I must, I should have been doing, makes us very fearful. Whereas actually the positive and the negative thoughts, you just take it to God, and you say, God, you say that it's you that gives us the power and the will to do what pleases you. Bring it back, basically. Bring it back and just refresh me.
Yes, definitely. And I think also seeing things differently, in terms of seeing it from, instead of seeing it like I should be praising God, or I should be worshiping God, or I should be praying to God, it's like I get the opportunity to, like I can, you know, and seeing the positive spin on it, so to speak, that actually this is an amazing opportunity that we get, that we can even commune with God. I think that's really helped as well.
So what about when life is full of uncertainties, right? There are ups and downs, not necessarily hard times, but just times of uncertainty. I don't really know which way to go. Life really is a journey, as people say. You know, it's about the journey, it's not about the destination. So what does self-worth and value look like when you're in the process?
Okay, so I think what that looks like for me when I'm in the process is reminding myself when times do get hard, because they do, and for myself, very, very often do.
They get hard.
Yeah, life is funny, because you'll be having like an amazing week, and then just one day will throw it off, and suddenly you feel like you have a bad life. It's like you're not having a bad life, it's just a bad day. But when those moments come, I think for me, what understanding my worth and understanding what my value does is actually allows me to still love myself through the process. So to not condemn myself, to not be angry with myself, because I'm naturally I'm a bit of a perfectionist. No, I'm very much so a perfectionist. Let me tell the truth. Yeah, I am, and by virtue of that, sometimes I can be quite hard on myself. So I can be like my biggest critic. So
same.
Yeah, you know, when those hard times come, it can be very easy for me to be like, what's wrong with me? Like, I'm not where I'm supposed to be. I'm not living my purpose, etc. And really be very defeatist with it. But I think what understanding my value and understanding my worth does is it kind of stops me from going to that kind of dark place, because that place is not profitable. Like nothing good's going to come from there. I can beat myself up all day, but it's not going to spur me on to create anything or be purposeful. So I think it kind of reminds me that God still loves me. Like, it's okay. Also, don't rely on your strength.
That's a big one.
You know, it's a spirit that ultimately, you know, will take control and will give me the kind of grace that I need. So I think worth just kind of puts things into perspective when you are having those hard times, and helps you to know that you are not what you're going through, whatever that might be.
You are not what you're going through. That's critical. You're not what you're going through. So we've talked about trusting the process a little bit, and Debra has a podcast called Trusting the Process.
Yeah.
So could you tell me a bit about that? You know, how it came up, what the purpose of it is, what you have learned through the conversations that you've had with people so far. Yeah. You know, people say trust the process, trust your journey. And what I've noticed is that in times where it doesn't look very purposeful, I can panic. And in those times when you panic, you're not really trusting. So it's a nice phrase. It's very hard to live. Definitely. In reality.
So I'll kind of give a bit of context in terms of what trust and process actually is for me now today. So once upon a time, trust and process was a phrase that I would kind of say to myself, like, trust the process. I'd say to myself when I was doubting. In particular, probably the most prominent time was actually in 2015. So I'd been working in like social media and marketing and whatnot, and then I was actually made redundant from a particular role at the time. And I was like, okay, this is fine, like things are going to be okay. Like I began trusting, because that's always how it begins. Yes. So, you know, I'll just apply for new roles, etc. And 1 month went to 2 months, 2 months went to 6 months went to, a year, and I didn't have a job. And it was genuinely like one of the hardest times of my life, definitely. And I think also because I touched on it a little bit, I think in one episode of the podcast, but during that time there was a lot happening. So I was navigating like a really difficult relationship. There was like some sickness in my family, so it was like everything that could go wrong all went wrong at one time. Yeah, exactly. So that's when trusting the process and the need to do that became super real to me. And interestingly, during that season I found a lot of strength in listening and reading and watching other people's stories, the highs and the lows, because I think it's so key to be able to see both. And I think that while social media is great and everything, Instagram, like everything is a highlight reel, you know. I can see how you succeeded, but I want to know, like, what did you have to overcome to get to where you are?
Because there's always something to overcome.
Yeah, always. And I think sometimes when you can see other people going through that or having something they had to navigate, it helps you know that you're still in the right place, you're still, you know, you're still on course. And so the idea kind of was birthed from there, because I was listening to a lot of different women in particular and their stories, and I just thought to myself, wouldn't it be amazing if there was a platform where this can be shared, like even more candidly and just more openly, especially from the UK, because a lot of the platforms I was seeing were US based. So that's kind of really when the podcast came about. So I came up with the idea of Trust and Process, the show, which is basically a show that celebrates Black women who are doing big things, and I'm not apologetic about that at all, because I think it's a necessary space to have created. And so basically just speak with different women about their journeys. There usually will be kind of elements of faith that come up in there, which is funny because I don't try to only have Christians on there, sort of thing, but I'm finding that faith just definitely comes out and is a theme. And it's basically just about people being able to hear stories, to inspire them and to help them know that they basically can achieve their dreams or their goals.
So through this Trusting the Process journey, let's like bring it up a level for people who are watching and how they can actually make that real in their own life. If you could summarize some points of how to trust the process. If I was gonna turn off this recording now and go out and try and, you know, I'm in the middle of a storm, like you said, everything happening that could go wrong basically all went wrong at one time. If that was me, what specific things could I do to strengthen myself?
Okay. Ooh, it's a biggie.
Yeah, it's huge.
Okay, so...
And it's different for everyone, to be fair, but it's always good to share experiences.
Of course, yeah. I like what you said about it being different to everyone. So everything I'm going to say, it might not be, you know, it might not work for everyone. And
it's not law.
Yeah, it's more the kind of general kind of guide, I guess I would say. I think the first thing is to pull away from whatever the situation is that maybe is giving you anxiety or fear or worry. And analyze it for what it really is. So take a look at, okay, where you really are at, what is really happening. Sometimes when like we're lacking trust or we're a bit afraid or whatever, some of the things that we're thinking are happening don't even really exist, if that makes any sense.
And they get amplified.
Exactly. Like step away and ask yourself, like, what is the truth about this situation? What's the truth here? So your mind might be telling you, I've ruined everything. I don't know, let's say you lost a job, for example, like myself. So mine might be telling you, I've ruined everything, I'm going to be a failure, like I'm never going to make it, whatever. Is that reality? Like, is that the truth? So question your thoughts, basically, and look at what is the truth here. I think once you've done that, then obviously you need to kind of further supplement yourself with the real truth. So I have to go back to the Word of God. Of course, I'm sure many people listening, maybe some will be Christian, some won't be, but from a Christian perspective, definitely the next step would be to, remind yourself of what does the Word say about my life, about where I'm going, and about maybe even where I've been, and let that be your truth. Another element as well, I think, is asking God for grace. I think that grace is so slept on. I know that, like, sometimes we might hear misuses of grace in terms of, I don't know, someone falls short and just ask for grace. Like, someone says grace, 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 and you really max out the grace card with God. But grace, in terms of grace being even deeper than strength, you know, sometimes the tasks and the visions and the purposes that God has placed on us, in fact, oftentimes they're larger than us, they're bigger than us. And that's why it can seem so daunting and it can seem so tiring. And sometimes you'll think, oh, what you need is strength. And you do. Strength is definitely key. But I think the grace to do what it is that God has placed you on this planet to do is very, very real. And I do believe we are all graced for our, you know, our personal journeys and like our personal stories. But there's no shame in asking for that grace and asking God for it often. So yeah, I'd probably say those would be like the few key things.
That is really powerful, just on a personal level as well, because you know that grace exists. But yes, I personally always, my thought goes immediately to grace in the context of I've messed up or I've done something wrong, so that's where the grace comes from. But also grace is for the journey, not just for when you mess up and you need to quickly correct something like Tipex or whatever. It's more that it's empowerment, it's you know, just a covering, I guess, over the entire process.
It's a divine ability ultimately, you know, that's what it is. It's, for me, when I'm asking God for grace, especially even in the making of the podcast and everything like that, it's me asking for a strength that is beyond me. You know, the Bible talks about like our his strength is made perfect in our weakness. And I think that that's through grace. And so it's just all about kind of tapping into that and just recognizing that I'm in need of it, and not being ashamed to ask for it.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's really touched me. So more broadly, we talked a little bit about self-care, comparison. What other things do you do to just look after yourself, pamper yourself? And that can be from the spiritual level all the way to, don't know, going out and buying Krispy Kremes. I don't know what it might be, but what else do you?
So on like maybe a more fun level, I do really like solo traveling. Like I really like going away by myself. Love going with people as well. But I'd say my first real solo trip was the US like a few years ago, and that really helped me realize the value in spending that much time with yourself. I'm an extrovert, so it's weird. So I do enjoy like people's company and whatnot, and I come alive, like I get my energy from people, but I also do need like my time and a reserve. So from time to time I'll kind of schedule that time in. I actually have a trip coming up which is going to be a solo trip, so I'm already excited about that, because it's just like, okay, I can care for myself, I can take the kind of time I want to take, I can go at my pace, and all those sort of things.
Where are you going?
I'm going to Dublin.
Oh, lovely. I love Dublin. It's beautiful.
You're going to have to tell me where to go, because it's my first time there, so I'm just like, oh, this should be interesting. But so that's probably one way, but that's like a more expensive way, because I do also think when people talk about self-care and they talk about self-love, etc., I think we always think of it in like grandiose kind of sense. Like we're always thinking, oh, I need to buy this, like all these big purchases, spa days, etc. And sometimes for me, like one of the easiest ways for self-care is just saying no and learning my limits. And this kind of goes back to me being a bit of a perfectionist, and I quite often have my hand in like loads of different pots. And one thing I've had to learn is the power of no, and actually how much rest that can bring. I spoke about it in one of my podcasts, but earlier this year I experienced like a really, really bad bout of burnout, where I was just like, I was just finished. Like, I was absolutely finished. I was exhausted. I was doing a lot of good things. They were good, but it was just too much. And I found it hard to say no at the time, but it wasn't until I really, really just crashed that I had to kind of take inventory and realize, okay, you know what? Looking after yourself is also saying no, and sometimes it will look like letting people down, but at times you have to be wise. Like, you have to use wisdom. We have a capacity, and there's only so much we can do at different times and in different seasons. And I think that for me, recognizing, you know, that I can't do everything all the time, that's okay, and not being ashamed or not feeling bad when turning certain things down if it means I can prioritize my rest. Definitely.
That's brilliant. What you said about, actually, it sometimes looks like letting people down when you're a perfectionist, or when you're somebody who just really wants to, you just don't want to let people down. It's just that simple. What happens to me is I overinflate how much I've let them down. So for example, if I ask somebody to do something and then for some reason they can't, it is annoying, but it's not something that I carry with me for days. I'm not depressed. So when I feel like I'm about to let someone down, I'm just like, I can't. And actually, it's going to be annoying, but it's not that deep. It's just really simple, and being able to be objective enough about the situation to allow yourself to say no.
Definitely.
And somebody once said, I'd rather look stupid than be out of alignment with what I'm supposed to be doing. And I think that's critical, because like you said, you can do a lot of good things. It's not really about what's good, it's about purpose.
Yes. Definitely.
And I was also listening to a podcast, which I now try to listen to like every month to remind myself that it isn't about good, it's about God. And it's by John Bevere, while he was speaking at Bethel Church, and it's called Stewarding Your Life for Eternity. Because in that, there's like a audio piece where somebody basically goes, you know, they go to God. It's all about the judgment seat of Christ. And it's too much to go into now, but it's really beautiful, and it's really powerful that, you know, for believers who are on their journey, God's judgment isn't actually about you're bad and you're going to go here. God's judgment is about, did you do what you were called to do, or did you just do good stuff?
Yes.
And in that process, when you get, and anything that is not aligned to the calling, even if it's good, at the judgment seat, at the end, gets burned up.
Wow.
And it makes you just think, okay, it's really not about what's good. It's about what I'm called to do, and just makes you take a step back and think, okay, I could be doing all these things, but when I get to the end, is it going to be irrelevant or not?
What'll be the worth?
And it doesn't mean that somebody doing those things you were doing for them, it might be relevant. It's not about the thing, it's actually about the person who does it and what they take forward and their obedience, basically. And I thought that's so powerful, because we can feel so much pressure to just perform and do stuff and look like we're thriving. You can get really stressed out about it, like, oh, am I in it and I'm not? I don't think it's about that, but I just think being conscious of it already brings you back to the center, because you know the stuff that you should be doing and the stuff that you're kind of just
doing
forcing or throwing in because you can, and all because you can, or all because it's good, or all because it's profitable, or all because other people applaud it. Doesn't really mean anything.
It's a value,
It doesn't mean it's a value. So
oftentimes it's also just doing things because it's what other people expect you to do.
Yes.
You know, so
I've dealt with that a lot.
Yeah, like, oh, everyone surely thinks I should go down this path, and I guess it makes sense. Okay, let me apply for that job, or let me join that department at church. Whereas it's not you. It doesn't come natural to you. It's not in line with, you know, like your purpose, and you can get so carried away with it. But it's just about almost being selfish with like your identity and your purpose, and and honing in on that.
So just to wrap up, we've talked about, you know, finding your value, protecting it on a personal level, and what individuals can do. And each individual is a product of society. What are the biggest challenges that we face as a society, or misconceptions we have about what is truly valuable and what is truly worthy, and where we should get our confidence from? What challenges are we facing, and how can we overcome that?
So I think for myself, I know I mentioned it earlier, but it is something that I'm very passionate about. I think comparison is definitely a very real one, and I think more so in this digital age, in the social media age. And I think oftentimes about like the younger generation, so maybe kids that are in school right now, secondary school, college, and I imagine them having to navigate school with Instagram, with, you know, the filters, with like all these different kind of ideas of beauty and all these kind of different ideas.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot that you're told, you can't even really figure it out for yourself.
Exactly. Like, and you know, it was hard enough when I was growing up. I sound like I'm really old, I'm not. But it was hard enough when I was growing up to talk less of it in this age. So I think comparison is a very real one, because I think that is damaging. A lot of young people, not just women, because I think sometimes the focus can be on women, but I think
it's across the board.
Across the board, by and large. But then I think another thing, probably like a more general thing that affects us, would be identity. So, and failure to understand our identity. And I think one of the things that's really key about this generation as well, and just I guess humanity really, is that we often place our identity in the wrong things. So I'd say, for example, at this age I'm at, I think that a lot of us place our identity in our career, which it makes sense. Like, I get it, you know what I mean? It completely makes sense. I understand why that pressure is there. But for example, during that time when I didn't have a job, you know, and I wasn't working, I began to make that about who I am as a person. So that began to equal, oh, I'm not worthy, I have nothing to add, you know, I'm not valuable, just because I wasn't working. And I think oftentimes, you know, when we get that job, we tell ourselves it's because it's something we're passionate about, but I think sometimes it's actually just for the title, is to be able to say, to be able to introduce ourselves and say, hi, I'm a executive, you know, and it feels good and everything, but that's not where your identity lies. And I think it's something I've had to even learn, even with ministry and even with things like Trust in the Process, the podcast, things that I consider to be God-given, even those are not who I am, if that makes any sense. Like, it's not tied, like, it's obviously elements of who I am, and, you know, my nature and, like, my passions come out through that, but you are not what you do.
Honestly, and I think that the best way to describe it is that it's not who you are, it's a manifestation of who you are. So you can't, and I think this is the issue with when people pour themselves into whatever it is, whether it's just looks or career, is that stuff can change. So it's a manifestation, because manifestations can evolve and find themselves in different places, and that's great. But when it becomes the core and it changes, then your whole life is thrown into disarray. And I'm sure that happens to all of us at some point.
Definitely. And it tends to happen, like, it'll be subconscious that you were placing your worth or your value in these things, and it's not until, like you said, like, something falls apart, you're, you know, the carpet's been taken from underneath your feet, suddenly you're like, actually, who am I, you know, without this job, or without this person, without this relationship, whatever the case may be. So I think understanding our identity is definitely a major one.
And I think that what you've just said about consciousness, and while we're wrapping up on this, but we're obviously going to have to keep talking about identity, and what we're aware of is, like, we think that because we don't wake up in the mirror and say, oh, I have a problem with my self-worth, or I have a problem with my self-confidence, or I have a problem with my identity, or I have a problem with comparison, we think that we don't we don't need to hear all this stuff. But the truth is, it's all subconscious, and it actually plays out in the actions, in the insecurities, in the overcommitment, the inability to say no. That's where that stuff comes out. So it's so important to have these conversations and be open about it, because even as we've been speaking, so many triggers have gone off in my mind, so I'm sure it's the same for everyone who would be watching. So that's been brilliant. Thank you so much. It's been really good to have you.
It's amazing. Thank you.
Just before we end, one question I ask everybody is, if you could give yourself 5 years ago, 10 years ago, one piece of advice, and that could be about anything, what would it be?
Okay, so I'd give myself several words, I'm not gonna lie. I would sit myself down and
here's a list.
We'd have a good okay, so on July the 6th, this is what I would have said to you, and on the I could say plenty of things, but I think probably the biggest thing on my heart right now would be that you are enough. Definitely to 16-year-old Debra, who was, like I said, trying to find her worth and, like, her value in relationships, and in attention and in compliments, and, you know, all of those different things. I think I was always just trying to prove to myself that I'm enough ultimately, and that I am of value. And I guess, I wish that she had known that earlier, that she is enough, and why she is enough, that she's enough because God says she's enough, that she's complete because God says she's complete, and that has nothing to do with what other people might say, what other people might not say. So that's probably definitely what I would say to her right now, but there'd be a few other things, but major things,
Thanks so much for watching this episode. If you found it helpful or useful, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you can follow us on social media and visit our website to submit your questions. The gathering is full of questions from our audience, as well as through things that our team have thought up as well. So we'd love to hear your questions, your thoughts, and your feedback.